Great to see you all here in Arnhem. Bitcoin City, huh? We're starting to get somewhere. We're definitely starting to get somewhere. But we have a lot of way to go still until Bitcoin dominates the world. And that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about here. Bitcoin, the forgotten use cases. We have an ecosystem, but there are blank spots on the map and we need to address them. And whoever addresses that is going to cash in serious dough. Let's take a look. So I'm Falkvinge on Twitter. Whenever I say something really clever or whenever I say something dipshit dumb, do post it on Twitter because I love seeing my name on Twitter even if I say something stupid. So we've already heard a bit about my previous exploits. I usually go into a bit of presenting who I am, what I did. Most people here might have heard of me already, so a couple of people who just thought I was generally awesome was the Swedish IT industry who gave me a prize for being IT Person of the Year just before I went into Bitcoin. Foreign Policy magazine called me one of the world's 100 most important thinkers for building society, and Time magazine nominated me as one of the world's most 100 influential people overall. So the reason I'm being pointed at like that is I do a lot of future studies. I read tons, I inhale enormous amounts of information, and I cross-reference all of it, basically. And so in 2011, I went all in into Bitcoin. I took all my savings and my entire credit line and put it all into Bitcoin. And just to simplify what happened a little, the price at that time was roughly $3. And the reactions when you do this, when you just have an information advantage over a lot of people, is that the world tends to get very hostile toward you. So I posted why I did this, as in my entire reasoning. And the top voted comment on Reddit on this blog post that I did, now this is not a random comment. This is the top voted comment in our Bitcoin. Went, I can't begin to comprehend the depths of the stupidity of this kind of reasoning. That's what you get. But then again, when you're running the numbers, when you're seeing that, yes, this is actually not just possible, but a plausible scenario, you can sometimes win. So today's entertainment, I'm going to look a little bit about principles that are important to uphold. And I call them analog equivalent rights. And they're about something very important that is being lost right now. And move on from there to look at the Bitcoin ecosystem compared to previous tipping points in history. Because these tipping points have a pattern. That's what I do, I look at patterns. And you can clearly see that there's a missing piece in the ecosystem. Whoever fixes that is going to get serious rich. So, analog equivalent rights, what do I mean by that? Well, we have a set of fundamental liberties, and they're being eroded and lost in a shift to a digital environment. Let's take a look at the letter as one example. The classic handwritten sealed letter. Our parents used to write those by hand, put them in an envelope, write the address of the outside of the envelope, put a stamp on it, and carry it by hand to a mailbox where it was physically handed to the recipient. That letter had certain characteristics to it. First of all, it was anonymous. It was the sender's prerogative and the senders alone, if they identify themselves as sender. You could write your name on the outside of the envelope for the entire world to know, on the inside, on the letter alone, for only the recipient to know, or not at all. Anonymous tip-offs were a staple diet for a free press. Our children don't have that anymore. Those letters were secret in transit. Nobody had the right or even the ability to look at what was being communicated and who was communicating with whom. Our children don't have that right anymore. It was untracked in transit. You couldn't see how long it took to reach a certain target. You couldn't see who was communicating with whom. You couldn't map all the social networks. This is a right our parent had. Our children don't have that right anymore. Last but not least, the mailman was never, ever responsible for the contents of the message because they were forbidden to open it in the first place. How could they possibly be liable for its contents? The messenger immunity has been something that has stood since the Roman Empire, the principle that a message carrier is never responsible for the contents of a carried message. Our children don't have that right anymore. These are just 4 characteristics of the letter that are not being carried from our parents to our children. And I think that's a very serious situation. We're essentially seeing a world where in the shift to digital, somebody decides that it was the physical paper and not the correspondence that was protected. And when I'm saying that it's only reasonable that our children have the same rights as our parents, which I think is perfectly reasonable, you see a bunch of people standing up and saying, "You can't possibly mean that!" In particular, the copyright industry, who go on to say, if you say that anybody should be able to send anything to anybody anonymously, we can't possibly make a profit. And then I say, so fucking what? An entrepreneur's role in society, this is entirely regardless of whether somebody can no longer profit. This is not rocket science. An entrepreneur's role in society is to make money given the current constraints of society and technology. An entrepreneur does not get to dismantle civil liberties just because they can't make money anymore. And yet, that's exactly what's happening. Because we're dealing with lawmakers. We're dealing with analog lawmakers, offline borns, who get their emails printed for them by their secretaries and therefore think they understand what the internet is about. And I wish I was making that up, but I'm not. So you have many actors who are trying to convince these analog lawmakers why it's in society's interest and jobs and voters and whatnot, why children can't have rights. And I think it's in our interest and frankly our duty toward the next generation to restore those rights to our children. There are more examples. I talked a little bit about the letter. There's more about the letter. For example, when the police does a house search after search warrant, personal letters were always very protected. The reason for a search warrant had to be fairly high bar in order for the police to be able to seize and search personal letters. However, if those letters happen to be stored on a computer, then the police doesn't need a search warrant at all. Even more so, if for our parents, when they had a personal diary, that had an even higher bar for search and seizure. Even if you could open personal letters, there were many cases where you could still not open a personal diary because it is so extremely private. But when it comes to our children's diaries, the mobile phones, which doesn't only contain what they thought of writing down, but frankly, everything they thought and felt. In the eyes of the law, this device is a random tool with the same privacy protection as a wrench. So you can see that there's work to be done here. Moving on, I mean, we're reading newspapers. It used to be obvious that you could take some spare cash, buy a newspaper completely anonymously at a kiosk, read whatever you wanted and discard the newspaper. Today, when we're reading the same kind of news online, it's getting tracked what we are reading, not just that we are reading some sort of news, but also what articles, for how long, and in what order, and what we do afterward. It's not just being tracked what we are reading, but also what we are not reading. This anonymity needs to be restored. We have work to do here. And moving on to what we do next, when we were looking for information in the library, librarians were absolutely fanatical about protecting our right to seek out information anonymously. Today, as we search for information, or rather as our children search for information, all of it is stored in history, and not just what we sought for, but also what we thought of searching for, but didn't. There are many things. Some people say, delete my browser history. I think somebody's search history is even more sensitive. There are already things where I can ask, well, would you be comfortable having this particular search term in your permanent search history? And a lot of people don't, and that's a problem. Our parents had that right, our children don't. And last but not least, the subject of this gathering, cash. It was obvious that you could bring any amount of money with you without being tracked, without anybody knowing how much you were carrying, and have an anonymous transaction without any kind of verification of your identity, of how much you were carrying, whether you were an illegal alien or whatnot. Our parents did it this way. Our children use credit cards today, which means that when our children are buying a piece of bubble gum, they are being subjected to a worse background check than if they were buying a bloody assault rifle, where various checks are done against financial institutions. They are effectively handing over their identity, checking credit history, block lists, and so on, only to get their bubble gum. Our parents had that right. Our children don't, and it's a problem. Our children are not inheriting the rights of our parents. And this is a key principle I think the Bitcoin community needs to address. I call this analog equivalent rights. And that's the overarching principle as I'm going into the next section here, which is about practicalities, which is about the forgotten use cases, practice, the forgotten use cases of the Bitcoin ecosystem. You know, I like pattern matching. I like looking at patterns. And in this case, I want to talk about the spreadsheet history. You know, today, when we need to create a spreadsheet, the easiest way to do so, the easiest way to share, the easiest way to collaborate, there are many, but one of the easiest is probably Google Docs. Just sending a link, having your mates edit whatever they like, and so on. That's a fairly recent phenomenon. Not long ago, the desktop was dominant, in which case we used to mostly use something called Microsoft Excel. And even before Microsoft Excel, there was something else called Lotus 123. So the key question here is, what caused the tipping point to hit from Microsoft Excel to Microsoft Excel from Lotus 123? How did Microsoft win over the Lotus users? And the obvious answer here that springs to mind is that you needed an import function, you needed a conversion function to the new and better software. And that is true. There was an import import a Lotus 123 file as a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. But, and this is my key point, it was necessary, but it was not sufficient to win. It was not sufficient to win. And there's a clear and present parallel here with the Bitcoin ecosystem. Because this created a one-way bridge. This created a dead end in existing workflows. When you have a corporate workflow that mandates Lotus 123 spreadsheets, and somebody is really into Microsoft Excel, So they prefer using Microsoft Excel. So they get this corporate Lotus 123 sheet, the old sheet, they import it on their computer. Great, they can work all they want with it in Microsoft Excel, and bam, that hits a dead end because there's no place they can send it onward in the corporation because the corporation uses Lotus 123 as its standard. It's a one-way bridge. You hit a dead end in the workflow because workflows are systemic. Workflows are organizational. They are slow, they have inertia, but habits are changed on the individual level. Habits are changed at the individual level. You needed the individuals to start working within the Lotus 123 workflow transparently for Microsoft Excel to just jump from 20% adoption to 85% adoption. They just did so by stealth at the individual level. So the killer feature here, the killer feature was to save as Lotus 123. So the individuals within this Lotus 123 system could use Microsoft Excel if they wanted. They could take a Lotus sheet, load it, import it, work with it, and save it back into that workflow. Once you had a two-way bridge, Microsoft won. The Bitcoin ecosystem is full of these one-way bridges. If you're looking at the individual level services, you have lots of great services like wallets, you have payments of buying tickets and hotel nights and whatnot. At the financial level, you're starting to have a really kick-ass ecosystem with not just trading coins, you can buy derivatives, you can buy on leverage and so on, which is really kicking the old banking system's butt. But at the organizational level, there is a huge deficit at present because every single use case addressed in Bitcoin today assumes that you have a legacy organization using fiat money, US dollars, euros, whatever, and a modern individual wanting to use Bitcoin to interface to this legacy organization. You have a hotel that has its cash flow or whatnot in euros, and you're enabling guests to pay in Bitcoin. That is the import feature. That is not the export feature. You're importing Bitcoin into the legacy world. What if I want to build a modern organization that's Bitcoin native and instead serve legacy individuals? What if I want to be fully Bitcoin native but still be able to have fiat customers into my organization? That's the other way. That's the other direction on this bridge. We are serving legacy organizations very well in the ecosystem today. There are no services if I want to start a Bitcoin native organization and interface to the legacy world. The other way of that bridge. And the reason obviously here is that Bitcoin has a huge competitive advantage in transaction processing. I can cut costs something enormously when I have Bitcoin on the back end. And I know that because I did that. I had an organization last summer with about 100 employees where payouts and bonuses and whatnot was paid fully automatic from the back end. It was awesome. And yet it did not take off because I was unable to change the habits on the individual level. I could not interface to legacy individuals. I could not let people change their habits at their own pace, but required everybody to be on board from the beginning. The bridge is still one way. The bridge is still for legacy organizations and modern individuals. If you want to build a modern organization and use it to onboard all the legacy individuals, the services are not there. And why did I want to do this? Normally, just to serve 100 people with payouts, I would have needed 3 to 4 people on full-time salary just for bank interfacing, just for fixing all the problems that appear with bank interfacing. Instead, this was done in code. This saves a whole lot of money, and it allows for low friction economy. And by the way, this system that I used is actually an admin system from the Swedish Pirate Party that's being generalized. It's very much alpha software, but if you're interested in trying it or maybe coding in it, then it's public domain. It's on GitHub. Go get it. So, while there are many services to pay with Bitcoin where the merchant receives fiat money, there are none where an individual can pay with a credit card and a modern organization receives Bitcoin. Now, I understand the clearing problem here. I understand the problem that a credit card can be reversed, but Bitcoin cannot, so there's a business risk. But that's all it is. It is a business risk. When you have a business risk, you modify the numbers. It is not a conceptual risk. It is not an existential threat. It is just a bloody boring scenario, but still one which solves a lot of headaches. And it is those companies, it is those entrepreneurs that sometimes solve the real unsexy problems, but those that cause a ton of headache, that strike it rich. I've been looking for a service, I've been asking for a service like this for the better part of 3 years. There isn't any. There is one in South America which comes with a lot of terms and conditions, Bitpagos. That's the best I've found so far. So we have a one-way bridge. We have an ecosystem that's made for modern individuals using Bitcoin. We have nothing for an organization to go kick ass and just drop kick the entire economy at this point. And we have technology that is fully capable of doing it. We just need the interfaces. So to take the leap here, we need that bridge for the individual habits. Wages, same thing. BitWage is a great service for people who want to be paid in Bitcoin. But it interfaces to a legacy organization. It assumes that the organization paying the wages pay in fiat money. There is no option where I can pay Bitcoin from the organization and the colleagues who prefer it receive fiat. Again, fix the one-wayness of this bridge. Fix the inability for an organization to be Bitcoin native. And this is going to take off. Paying bills, same thing. There just isn't that option for an organization to pay bills in Bitcoin. There isn't the save as Lotus 1, 2, 3 option. There isn't the right back into the old legacy until the old legacy system has adopted option. The killer feature is not there. The killer feature that causes tipping points to happen is not there. The Bitcoin ecosystem has only made the import thing, as an import this new feature into the system. We don't have the write it back feature. The opportunity here is obvious. A company can eliminate an entire cost center just doing paperwork. I mean, most people here have seen Office Space, yeah? Initech accounts receivable, Gina speaking. Just a moment. Initech accounts receivable, Gina speaking. Just a moment. Code can do that today. Code can do that today. Which means that you can build a company, a distributed autonomous organization if you prefer, any kind of organization. It doesn't have to be a legal entity any longer, in a much smoother, much cheaper, and much more efficient way. And if you're more efficient, you're reducing the economy friction. This is what I'm getting to. Sometimes the killer apps aren't the most sexy applications. I'm wearing magnet shoelaces. Somebody last year made a better shoelace and they were good enough for me to pay money to them. you can make a better shoelace. One of my favorite companies in this aspect is a company called Expensify. They made expense reporting tolerable. Their motto was simple: we make expense reporting not suck. Which is the point here. Sometimes the killer apps are just those apps which make life a hell of a lot easier. And it doesn't have to be high tech, it doesn't have to be cutting edge. But if it solves a problem for a lot of people, if it makes something a lot cheaper to build, then you might have a killer app on your hands. And that's my point here. The forgotten use cases are those serving a Bitcoin native business interfacing with a legacy world. That's a completely blank spot on the map. You can't build a Bitcoin native business yet. So one of my predictions, wrapping up, one of my famous predictions is that Bitcoin is going to hit its killer app sometime in the 2019 to 2020 timeframe. I'm basing that on the observation that it typically takes 10 years for something from conception until somebody hits the killer app that just kicks off usability. We can see this pattern in file sharing, which was common on bulletin board systems over phone lines. Took off with something called Z modem in 1989, and then it took until 1999 for Napster to hit. Infrastructure was being built out in the meanwhile, certainly, but people had this application in the back of their heads, and it took 10 years to make it usable. Blogging, same thing. When people started their personal weblogs, initially manually maintained and then gradually using MySQL and whatnot to automate it, until you had a generic blogging platform like TypePad and WordPress. That took 10 years. Streaming video, 1995 that appeared on some porn sites where you had streaming GIF video. Very, very low tech, but it worked. And then YouTube launched in 2006. That puts a prospective killer app of Bitcoin somewhere in the 2019 to 2020 timeframe. And the interesting corollary here, the interesting observation, is that this killer app, while it's not the total world dominance, but just being the thing that enables mass adoption to start accelerating, like YouTube, like WordPress, and so on. The interesting corollary here is that this killer app service has probably not been founded yet. We're in mid-2016. This time frame is about 4 years out. The opportunity field lies completely open. The killer app has not been founded. So, my key message is that for any tipping point to happen, the bridge must be two-way. The bridge must be two-way, and it isn't today. That's the forgotten use case. Thank you.